gone now.
That's because the film started. All right, so we're looking at a source here. Step one, when you analyze the source, you read through it once to identify theme or themes. Nationalism can create a sense of shared identity and strength, but it often comes at the cost of fostering division and hostility. The challenge is to find unity without breeding conflict. Quickly, what are some themes? Nationalism. Other themes. Sorry? Identity. Shared identity. Collective identity, right? Internationalism. It's not explicit, but it's implicit. Conflict. Hostility. Division. Strength. Unity. So some of these key terms can help us identify a theme. And those are the big rocks. Those are the key terms. So one thing we can do is look at the themes. Now, would you argue that this is embracing nationalism, rejecting it, or saying that we need to reform nationalism? Reform it. So it's not saying let's completely abandon nationalism. Nationalism's okay, but it's flawed, so we need to reform it. What are the flaws of nationalism? Creates division and hostility. So although nationalism may be flawed, with some reforms, it may be able to achieve its objective. Is the objective explicit, implicit? What is the goal here? The goal is to get over some conflict. The goal is to create a society without conflict, without hostility, maybe have unity. We can imply that maybe we're talking about full potential again. So breaking down the source. Nationalism can create. Doesn't say does, doesn't say will, doesn't say always. It says can. Translation. The usage of can allows for possibilities where nationalism does not create a sense of shared identity and strength. We can infer then that the perspective presented is that some forms of nationalism are more capable at achieving a shared identity, and as a result, strength that comes with it. You guys talked about that. I'm sorry. You're going to have some moments today where you're like, oh, crap. But you don't have to do all of this, right? You don't have to have done all of this. But that's the significance of just the word can. If I change the word can to does or always does, it changes the perspective. It says can. It can do it. It's not an absolutist tone then. It says it can do it. So words that are left without detailed elaboration include collective identity. Is this identity manipulated by the state? Like, who defines or who molds the collective identity? I think of the cartoon that we have in 20, where Hitler is taking all of the people and creates the statue out of them. He is literally recreating the German collective identity under his sense of National Socialism and authoritarianism and fascism, trying to create, the perfect being. That's the Lebensborn. Let's breed superior German, Aryan, perfect babies. That's how we get ABBA. That's the benefit of ABBA, right? The two of the members were Lebensborn.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, there you go. Because it's beautiful music. So words that are left without detailed elaboration, including collective identity. Is this identity manipulated by the state? Is it organically and sometimes spontaneously grown from the grassroots? Like the French Revolution? Was that spontaneous? Was it organic, or was that manipulated by the philosophers? Was it maybe not a grassroots, but maybe kind of like the Bolshevik Revolution, where it was led by a few? Not all of the third estate knew why they were revolting. They're being manipulated by a few enlightened ones. How many shared values define collective identity? How many of the following must be present? Is it a collective identity if we have shared values, shared norms, shared traditions? Do we all have to have shared traditions? Do we all have to have the same religion to have a collective identity? In Canada, we have more than one religion. Does that mean that Canada has no collective identity? Do we have to have shared political priorities and approaches to government to have a collective identity? So when I analyze the source, I might be asking some hypothetical questions so that I can further the conversation. unpack what's there. Having strength follow identity in the outcomes of nationalism, we can infer that it is the shared identity that creates the strength of the nation. So if you look back to the source, nationalism can create a sense of shared identity and strength. Strength comes second, so we can infer that this leads to that. That's analysis. The placement of words is significant. This leads to that. Nationalism can, significant that it doesn't say always does, create a sense of shared identity and strength. Now we can infer that this leads to that. And again, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad.
I wish you read them already.
Yeah, well, maybe it's good that I didn't. I'm sure you have 100. Because if you didn't get 100, then nobody did, and I'm going to be very disappointed.
Oh, I'm the new Ben.
Yeah, well, Ben's Ben when it comes to, like, you know, cast of characters, kind of memorization of stuff. Ben's a good Ben, but you know, that's a different outcome. That's a different type of assessment. Can collective identity be one of multiplicity? Can you have collective identity that includes multiculturalism, multilingualism, religious freedom? Can your collective identity be that we're all different? Is that a collective identity? Having strength follow identity in the outcomes of nationalism, we can infer that one leads the other. What the source leaves unsaid is how one, or even who, defines the quality of strength. Marx defines strength different than Smith, different than Rousseau. Cast of characters. So the source talks about, comes at the cost of blah, blah, blah. So nationalism can create a sense of identity and strength, right? So when the source says nationalism can create strength, ideological nationalism, socioeconomic nationalism, Marxism leads to a strength, an egalitarian strength, voiced by the proletariat to overcome the will of oppression that is the cycle of class conflict. Smith, he doesn't want any of that. Strength for him, the wealth of a nation, is when there's less, not more government. And Rousseau, well, he's a different kind of bird, right? He wants public property, he wants collective ownership, but he wants autonomy, political autonomy. He wants independence politically. He wants the opposite of authoritarianism. So when the source says strength, that word can be unpacked differently. This is the analysis part, right? Comes at a cost. So the term cost is nearly universally synonymous with a negative outcome. This term is meant to announce the issue within the source that must be overcome. So the word cost here says, oh, the problem's coming here, right? This is the obstacle. This is the problem. So the word cost is purposely used to present something that is nearly universally synonymous with a negative outcome. Costs are not something we like. You know, that costs $1,000. Oh, I'm glad to pay $1,000, right? The word cost isn't usually seen as a positive thing. Fostering division. So division is the measurable privilege of the above-mentioned cost. The term could be manifested social division, political division, economic division. In opposition to the source, some actually like division, think division is healthy. So as I unpack the source, I begin to think about who would be opposed to it. So the source is attacking division, but some may say division actually creates a healthy society. I'm going to be over there for a second. So think about history. Think about current events. Give me an example where, because the society was divided, it led to the society getting stronger. I'll give you one. Society in the 1950s in America was divided over civil rights, and in that division you had people like Rosa Parks, that was an activist that challenged the norms of society, like social injustice, Jim Crow, separate but equal, and became an activist, protests against a society that perpetuated injustice and inequality, exposed the injustice, and pulled the nation away from inequality towards a nation that is more tolerant and more inclusive. So if society wasn't divided, if everybody just accepted that, oh, you're a different ethnicity, so you're worth less, then America never becomes the America it is today. That's one example how a divided society creates a better society. Give me enough. Right here, this moment, is why we have class, right? That's why it's nice to know the test while you're having the lessons. So then you know what to look for. Because at the end of social 30, you might have other examples. At the end of social 20, because this is a 20 essay, they're very right moral. That they might be like, oh, divided society. Well, Canada is divided, and the divisions in Canada made Canada stronger. What's the example of that? What's the division in Canada that's made Canada stronger? Canadians were divided over something, or really, maybe they're still divided, but because of that division, we're stronger. Because we don't have conformity, because we don't have adherence to one perspective or one value set. Because of that, we're a better Canada. That's okay. There will be some later in the document. Hi! I'm back. You ever do that when you're recording yourself? You pretend like the video feed has frozen, and you're like, and then like the people watching are like, oh, refresh, and they're like, just kidding. I do that all the time.
I haven't recorded myself since COVID because of PTSD. So
I sometimes just do this for fun. Anywho, so the blah, 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 blah. So some would say that division is healthy. So the writer had many words to attach with division. If we change the claim to always, then the division, then the tone would change, right? Blah, blah, blah. Hostility, jumping ahead. Again, like before, structuring the sentence to read hostility following division, we can infer that because of the division, it leads to hostility. Because of the structure of the sentence. Hostility, like most terms, is left without some additional qualifying descriptions, and thus allows the reader to infer the form and severity of the hostility. Hostility can be economic, can be social, can be political. What does economic hostility look like? Poverty, oppression, economic exploitation, sweatshops, right? Slavery. What's political hostility look like? Shut up, it doesn't matter what you think, right? You will be silenced. Taking away the freedom of expression, freedom of speech. What does social hostility look like? Marginalization, maybe ostracizing, maybe treating a group of people that they're not equal. Irish need not apply. Irish, let's not talk to them. They can't walk on the same roads as us. They're dirty, they're filthy, they're swine. Is
that wrong?
Again with the racism. So regardless of the category, the term itself translates a tone of negativity. Because like the term cost, the term hostility is nearly universally recognized as destabilizing, destructive, and therefore negative. There are some, however, who would argue that hostility is a good thing. Civil disobedience, hostility with the government, may be seen as good. Who is an example of an activist who practiced civil disobedience, challenged government policy, was jailed for it, but ultimately by challenging policy, society evolved, and potentially the people had a better relationship with government because of it? And the answer is not gone. There's somebody that you're going to get in your cast of characters in 30, Henry David Thoreau. We have to add people to our cast of characters. And then when you get to the test, even if you do 30 by summer school, as you get these people down, then it just connects. All 30 is a webbing of related ideas. And then you're like, oh, Henry David Thoreau. Because President Polk wanted to use his tax dollars to go to war with Mexico, and Thoreau didn't think that America should be practicing imperialism against Mexico, so he refused to pay his taxes, went to jail, and then his aunt actually paid for him to get out of jail, and then he pouted and went and lived in a cabin in the woods. Henry David Thoreau. Civil disobedience.
And he kind of looks like Abe Lincoln, so.
Kind of looks like Abe Lincoln. Civil disobedience, Jesus. He disobeyed Roman law. The challenge is to find unity. And if you can write an essay, at the end it's like, this person mentioned Hitler and Jesus in the same paragraph. It's like, oh, that's impressive. You know, it's just weaving things together, right? The challenge is to find unity. This is presented as a solution to the issue, as a path to overcoming the obstacle, and the obstacle of fostering division and negative outcome of hostility. Finding unity, though, the source says, let's find unity to overcome division. Oh, that's simple, right? Let's find unity to overcome division. The words mean the opposite each other. That's one of the most simple statements. I might attack that. The purposeful use of find instead of terms like create is simplistic. How do we find it? You know, what role is the state playing? What role are individuals playing? Is it manufactured? Is it organic? Is manufacturing going to make things worse? Lots of cool things there. So this is all analysis stuff. Consider other points of view. In the division of society, nationalism can, it doesn't always. Shared identity creates strength. This could be countered with shared identity creates weakness. There's room to explore that, you know, shared identity did weaken states, like we saw maybe with the USSR. Nationalism comes at the cost of fostering division. There's room to argue that division isn't a cost, but rather a benefit. Division will create hostility. You could counter that although sometimes there might be a correlation, this isn't an absolute causation. Jason Eisbrenner language there. You like talking about correlation and causation. So now that I'm considering the division of society, I'm thinking about my thesis statement in my body. Whereas the source creates a causation between division, hostility, there may be a correlation, but it doesn't have to be absolute. That's a body paragraph if you want it to be. Nationalism comes at the cost of fostering division is a claim in the source. That's an assumption. Whereas the source claims that nationalism costs or comes at the cost of fostering division, it assumes, the source assumes division's bad. It can be good. Let's look at divided Rosa Parks is America. The challenge is to find unity. In order to achieve the goal, the path to achieve unity must come without breeding conflict. Like above, there's room to disagree. That the post-socioeconomic and political upheaval that was the French Revolution under the reforms and vision of Napoleon France was able to achieve more power and glory than it had during the old regime because it embraced upheaval and disunity. That it was through upheaval and disunity France became stronger. Napoleon made France more powerful than it was under King Louis XVI. So the source discredits division and conflict, but it was through conflict that France became stronger, not weaker. We could talk about the Bolsheviks, Bolshevik Revolution. So one point of consideration when I'm thinking about my body for this essay, you know, the source is saying that division's bad, conflict's bad, but the Russian Empire under the Romanov dynasty was stale. It was backward. It was feudal. They hadn't had the French Revolution yet, and it was the 20th century. So the Bolshevik Revolution led by Lenin will pull the backward feudalist Russia into the 20th century, and by the time of Stalin, they're going to become a superpower. Remember that prop we have, you know, the ends justify the means? Stalin takes them from the wooden plow to the rocket ship. They're first in space in 57 with Sputnik, first person in space in 61 with Yuri Gagarin. How did they do that? Not by having, you know, peace and tranquility, but by challenging and having conflict. It was the Bolshevik Revolution. It was through that conflict that the Soviet Union became greater. But then, because they disallowed questioning the state from within, they once again stagnated. That under Stalinistic rule, there wasn't room to question the state. So although they achieved this jump up to the 1950s where it looked like they're becoming a superpower. Then they stagnate again because there was no opportunity to politically challenge the state. And they stagnate in the 70s. And then in 80, what's Gorbachev's solution to the stagnation? Well, he didn't want that. That's what happens. But what was his solution to the stagnation? He said we need some conflict politically. We need the state to be questioned. He introduced the policy of perestroika is economic, glasnost is political. It is glasnost. So we have a paragraph where we have the Bolshevik Revolution is upheaval that pulls, feudalistic Russia into the 20th century. They achieved this greatness under Stalin, but then because of Stalin, they end up stagnating again. And then Gorbachev recognizes the stagnation, tries to overcome it with glasnost, but it's too little too late and the Soviet Union collapses. So it shows that in order for a society to continue to be strong, they can't eliminate conflict. They need to allow for conflict. Going back here, it's the challenge is to find unity without breeding conflict. No, we need conflict. Conflict made Russia stronger, made the Soviet Union stronger. Taking away that conflict, not allowing to be in conflict with the state, not allowing to oppose the state and have dissent, led to a stagnation of society. So we have a couple of examples there that would argue against the assumptions. The current global hegemon, America, was born out of a conflict with Britain. The 13 colonies had a conflict. 2% taxes was way too high. So we're going to dump our tea in the Boston Harbor, right? The greatest nation in the world today wouldn't be born had they not embraced conflict. So, when we think of our response, we have to start thinking about arguments in response to the claims and assumptions of the source. A claim, nationalism does not always create a sense of shared identity. Nationalism does not always, so I could argue the source is saying nationalism can create a sense of shared identity. My essay might begin with nationalism does not always create a sense of shared identity. There's something called Dutch nationalism, but there isn't really a shared identity there. You know, you have Flemish people, you have Wallons, you have Belgian people, you have people speaking different languages. It's not happening. Then you might be like, I don't know a lot about the Dutch. Well, then don't talk about them. A shared identity can weaken a nation. That might be my argument. So they think a shared identity will strengthen a nation, and I'm going to argue the opposites here, right? I'm going to say, no. Shared identity can weaken a nation. By forcing this shared national identity of Yugoslavs upon the Serbs, the Croats, the Bosnians, the Herzegovinians, the Slovenes, the Slavians, the Montenegroans, the Macedonians, it creates, once again, a powder keg that explodes in civil war in the 1990s. And there's a little bit of stuff on there about that. About how Tito tried to create this collective identity. And trying to force a collective identity made things worse. Sounds a lot like Canada. Sounds like a lot like residential schools. You know, we're going to have one national identity. If we're going to have one national identity in Canada, it's probably going to be pretty European. So let's have schools where we force non-Europeans to come to school and become more European. That's residential schools. The process of trying to create a national identity in the image of Europeans weakened Canada. That's why we have truth and reconciliation today to overcome a weakness from our past. So the source is based upon this assumption that national identity shared will make it stronger. We're seeing evidence that they're wrong. So as you read the source and as you analyze it, as you prepare your body, you might want to think about, how could I argue against the assumptions being made? Building a strength in one area of a national identity might create weakness in another area. So national identity is a pretty big umbrella. So if we try to create one national language in Canada, we're all going to speak English. Well, that's going to create division with our francophones. Or we're all going to be Catholic. That's going to anger a lot of non-Catholics. or we're all going to be fill in the blank, conservative. We're going to have an ideological national identity. We're going to be united under one ideology. We're all going to practice traditionalism. 2 genders. Women stay home. That's going to anger a few people. Hypothetically speaking, I'm guessing. A few people might be upset that if there was a politician that ran on that platform and saying, we're going to unite Canadians under a national identity of traditional genders and traditional gender roles. Are they getting elected? No, because that's not what Canada wants. So the idea is that if you force a national identity upon people, upon a nation, it's going to weaken the nation. Having a divided nation can strengthen a nation. Here's the whole Rosa Parks, Malcolm X stuff that I alluded to. So if you don't know about it, there's a place to look at. And it's not just about civil rights movement as a historical thing. It's talking about civil rights today. That there's still people today saying, we need to be heard. Argument, divisions in society do not have to lead to hostility. You can have divided societies that are very peaceful. Switzerland's one of the most divided societies in the world. Very peaceful country, very stable country in Europe. But yet, there's Germans, there's French, there's Italians, there's the Romanish. These people don't often coexist in Europe without conflict, but they do in Switzerland. And they speak their own languages, and they have different cultures and religions and stuff. And yet, they have peaceful coexistence. They're divided, but they're not hostile to each other. So the assumptions in the source, I would say, are wrong. And that's my body. That's how now that I've analyzed, this is the conversation we're having. This is what you think about it. This is what I think. And I'm going out on a limb here, and I'm just attacking everything. I'm taking the complete voice of opposition, pointing out how the source is wrong about everything. You don't have to criticize everything in the source. But that's just the path that I went down. The best path to unity is through democratic government programs. Some examples of government programs found in specific democracies have been designed to create a sense of national unity. So because the source is talking about how do we create unity, you could take an argument that needs to be government manufactured. And if you do that, you could talk about civic education programs in the States, national service programs in Israel, bilingual education in Canada. You can talk about cultural exchange programs in Germany, national symbols in India. All of these are government programs that create unity. Or you might say, you know what, it shouldn't be manufactured by government. It could be led by the people. And then you come up with other examples. Now, let's say that you're thinking of this, but you can't think of examples like this. You're brainstorming. And you're like, man, I'd like to talk about how unity can be grown by the government through policies, but I'm stuck. It's 1:15 in the morning. It's summer school. You're stuck. And you're like, I don't know. I don't know the examples. What do you do? What do you do? 1:15 in the morning. You're like, I need to come up with examples of programs, government-created programs, that can create national unity. You're stuck. ChatGPT. You don't email me. I'm not answering emails at 1:15. Yeah. If I'm here at 7 a.m., I'm probably not looking at my screen at 1:15 hoping that somebody has a problem. Right? Go to ChatGPT and just say, list examples that demonstrate that government programs can create a sense of national unity. And then if it says something like bilingual education programs in Canada, and the little short description isn't enough for you, then say, give me an in-depth summary of bilingual education programs in Canada. AI is not going away. It's a revolution in research, but it's something that you have to use without being pulled into plagiarism. It's a tool, like a calculator. I have what do you call that? Like a rolling ruler, a slide ruler. that this is how we might have done math back in the 50s or something. This was replaced by a, TIE board, right? If you have a Texas Instrument 84, you don't need a slide ruler. You guys have to get this for math 10C? No, you don't, because it's obsolete now. AI is making some of the other things that we used to do a little obsolete. The quicker you can use it properly, the more it's going to help you. It's not cheating if you're being directed to do it. So don't do it in English language arts if your teacher doesn't want you to do it. Summer school, it's 1:15 and you can't come up with an example. Don't wait for 8 hours until you can hang out with me on Google Meet. ChatGPT that. Because that's where I got all of this stuff from. This is all copied and pasted out of that. I asked ChatGPT, give me this, and it gave me these. All of this stuff, all of this part, once I started listing these things, took me about 8 minutes on ChatGPT while I was working out yesterday. And it's like, oh, you know what? I didn't think of that, but that's pretty smart. I like that thing about divided society makes society stronger, civil rights, Rosa Parks. I'm like, oh, that's insightful. That's an E moment. Thanks, ChatGPT. Societies that are divided and not hostile, it might have taken me a day to come up with Switzerland. Took them 2 seconds. The best path to unity is through non-democratic government programs. So the best path to unity isn't by a democracy, but we need a dictatorship. Now, ChatGPT said, we don't like this. Like, they give me a little warning. It's important to note that advocating for a non-democratic government's not good, because, AI is pretending that it's not, like, going to change the world into a techno-dictatorship. But then it said, but if you really want examples of government programs that create unity, here's state-controlled media in North Korea, here's the food assimilation programs in China, here's state-sponsored ideological education in the Soviet Union. That's a good one. Here's censorship and internet regulation in Russia today. Yeah, those work. So, and then I'm like, okay, Russia. And then I asked ChatGPT, using Russia and only Russia. Oh, pizza's at the door. Hello? Hello? Yeah, I think there's some pizza at the door. I'm probably going to have to go get that. So, I'll finish this. Using Russia and only Russia, I asked, can you, using Russia, defend this argument? And I gave them the argument that we need this, and then they gave me this rant about Russia, and then I asked them to give me another one about Canada, but maybe I didn't include the Canada one. I'd ask you to do now, just read over the Russia one, and I'm going to go grab the pizza.